think you should.
In the last video I did on this PC, the actual build guide, which you can check out here, I promised a benchmarks test of the entire system. So in the spirit of following through with that promise, I have taken a time to compile a list of different benchmarks that I use to push this system to its limits, and to actually test its performance on a few different levels. So the first thing I did was test all of my benchmarks while using the Open Broadcaster software 64-bit version to actually get a baseline for what my system could do under a normal use case of both recording and pushing the system to its limits. I then re-recorded all the benchmarks with the Sony a7S Mark II camera just to make sure the computer was not being affected by any other programs. So the benchmarks I used were as follows. First was TimeSpy from 3D Mark, secondly was CPUZ, followed closely by Cinebench, then Unigine Heaven, and Furmark. I additionally tested both the Grand Theft Auto 5 benchmark and the Shadow of Mordor benchmark, and some in-game footage from Overwatch to kind of get an idea of what this computer can really handle. If you do remember from the first video itself, the purpose of this rig was to not only get some basic experience just building a system, but also to have a high-quality, mid-budget system that could easily tackle both light content creation, which is editing and rendering and things like that, as well as anything I need it for school, and then also some light gaming on the side. Therefore, I chose what I thought would be the best lineup of both CPU and GPU benchmarks to test my brand new system. The specs, as seen in the build video, are the Ryzen 1600x processor, 3.8 GHz, and I overclocked it to 4.0 GHz. The Asus ROG Strix 1060 OC Edition graphics card, 6 GB, overclocked to 1974. And then 16 GB of Corsair Vengeance RAM in DDR4, a 3 TB Western Digital Blue hard drive, and a 250 GB Samsung Evo, the 850 solid state drive. I also have a 650 watt Corsair power supply in there as well. The first benchmark I ran was TimeSpy, which has 4 different tests. First is a demo test, there are 2 graphics tests, and then a CPU test. The results yielded an overall score of 4490, with the GPU score coming in at 4343, and the CPU coming in at a respectable 5565. According to 3D Mark's website, similar systems scores landed in that same range about 770 out of 960 times. Scores ranging from about 600 points at the low end somehow, all the way up to around 5,000 overall. So I've got pretty good results then. The second benchmark I ran was CPUZ. Interestingly enough, the results on this one were a bit surprising. The multi-threaded score was really no surprise, coming in somewhere between 3,500 and 6,500, which was slightly lower than the reference of the Ryzen 1600x, which is the next processor from AMD, which has 8 cores and 16 threads. What was surprising, however, was the single-threaded score, which came in at 436, which was 21% higher than the 1700X's single-threaded score of 385. Who knows, maybe I hit the single-threaded silicon lottery. Next was Cinebench, which kind of threw me for a loop. I tested it many times with a baseline score of 1242 to compare it to. Even after overclocking my CPU to 4 GHz, I was only getting scores between the 1200 and 1240 range. The 1242 score was the result I received the first time I tested the CPU after building the computer. Maybe I'm doing something incorrectly, but I'll just figure that out as time goes on. Finally, the GPU-only benchmarks. Unigine Heaven ran smoothly at an average FPS of 66.8 and a score of 1682. Furmark was tested twice, once using the Donut of Death, and once using the much less intense ROG Furmark bench. The donut test yielded a result of 2944 points and a min-max FPS of 49 and 51. The ROG test yielded a score of 3987 and a min-max FPS of 66 and 68. The game benchmarks were very successful as well, with the Shadow of Mordor benchmark yielding an average FPS of 95 and a max pushing almost 130. And GTA ran with average FPS values rarely dipping below 100 FPS on high settings at 1080p. Overall, I'm very pleased with this system. Both the CPU bench and GPU bench results yielded roughly what I expected compared to other builds of this caliber. I have experimented with overclocking both the CPU and GPU, and I will continue to find the sweet spot for both in this mid-range budget Batman-themed build. Thank you all so much for watching. Comment down below with any questions or suggestions you may have for future videos, and subscribe for more.